So I'm at this kind of interesting overlook, kind of above Gooseneck State Park. Climbed down to the edge, climbed down to the edge of this little spit out here, trying to get a better view. And I quickly realized that once I got to this view, I wanted to do a panorama, and I figured this was a good time to talk about making sure you have the most perfect panoramas you can possibly get. It's not quite as easy as just panning the camera left and right. There's a few more things to take into consideration, so here we go. So one of the first things you can see on here is that I have a nodal rail on this camera, and what this does is help prevent parallax within the photo. A nodal rail is not important in every single situation for taking a panorama, but it is important in areas where the foreground is fairly close to the camera. If you're just doing like more telephoto distances, or kind of everything is pretty far away and you don't have a foreground element to consider, then you don't need a nodal rail at all. However, when you've got the foreground very close to the camera, like, as close as I do in this situation, parallax does become an issue. And, to explain that, imagine, when you're driving in a car and you look out the window and the objects in the foreground are moving by really fast, but then the faraway background stuff is moving by really slow. So that's parallax. And if I don't take that into consideration, then when the panorama gets stitched together, the foreground and the background don't always line up. There's like small inconsistencies that you might see in those situations that are just not very good. So in this situation, I do want the nodal rail to help control the parallax. So the next thing that I want to make sure when taking a good panorama is that the tripod is level. I can see here that the tripod is level with my bubble level here, and also the in-camera level on the camera I can see is level. I don't care about the tilt. That doesn't need to be level, just it has to stay the same throughout the image. But as long as that in-camera level is good, then we're all right. And you can see as I swing all the way over, it stays almost perfectly center. It's a little bit off. That tends to happen. But as you can see, going from left to right, it stays pretty level throughout the image. And if you don't have your camera level or your tripod level, you'll notice as you pan from left to right, you'll get kind of a swing. It kind of will start off at one side, maybe level, and then as you go to the other side, it tilts, and then you've got a pretty significant angle on the end of the image, and then it might still stitch together okay, but it'll just look crappy. So that's tip number 2. The next bit of advice I have to making sure you have a great panorama is to give yourself at least 30 to 50% overlap in between each photo. So I'll take the shot and then just focus on a subject within the shot or an element within the shot, and then make sure that I don't move the camera 50% past that. And that's just to ensure that everything lines up correctly when you stitch it together and there's no inconsistencies. Otherwise, sometimes you'll get errors and it'll say Lightroom unable to merge photos. You can see here would be the start of my image, and then I would pan over, be about 50%, pan over again, do another 50%, and so on to make sure that it overlaps correctly. The next thing I wanted to talk about when doing panoramas is to make sure that you shoot at least a full frame extra on each end of the panorama and go wider than you need to on the top and the bottom. Especially if you're doing wide angle panoramas, that's very important because you'll get a lot of barrel distortion in the lens. And then when it stitches together, due to that barrel distortion, you could very easily lose a significant portion of the panorama that way. A lot of people in workshops also ask me about focus stacking a panorama. And, that's a situation you can do that. I've never run into situations. I have never run into a situation where focus stacking the panorama benefited me in any way. Just get up, get a little bit higher, get a little bit further back, go a little bit wider, just to make sure you don't have to do that. A bracketed panorama, totally fine. Lightroom does it for you, but focus stacking a panorama or focus stacking a bracketed panorama, that's just giving yourself a headache. The next piece of advice I have to shooting panoramas is to photograph things vertically rather than horizontally. Portrait mode gives you the ability to zoom in a little bit more and maintain perspective. You know, I love wide angle lenses, but as you're shooting really, really wide and things get further and further away, the wider you go, you kind of flatten the image a little bit. You just lose perspective on the depth of an image. So this scene right here, actually, that I'm photographing tonight, I could have shot it and gotten everything in one, you know, ultra wide angle shot at 14 millimeters. And I did a couple of those, but I just didn't think they looked good as having a panorama. So instead, I tilted the camera vertically, allows me to zoom in and get a little bit more, maintain the size of the image or maintain the perspective of the image. And zoomed in, instead of 14, I was at 24 millimeters. And then that way, I'm panning left to right with the 24 millimeters, so it still maintains the size. It doesn't become as flat. You still get the depth to the image that you lose when you're shooting at that ultra wide angle perspective. And the final piece of advice for making sure you have the most perfect panoramas possible is to shoot in manual mode. Do not shoot in aperture priority. I used to do that all the time, but I would notice when I went to stitch these together, there would be strange artifacts or strange banding, usually in the sky of the panorama image and kind of the final stitched product. And that's because as you're changing from left to right and panning the camera over, the light is often changing pretty dramatically along with that. And so if you're doing aperture priority, it's trying to meter an average throughout the image, and it's going to lighten and darken things as it goes along. Now, Lightroom will take some of that into consideration. However, it will not do a perfect job. There are often inconsistencies, and you'll notice it most often in the sky. And if you don't shoot in manual mode and you shoot in aperture priority, you'll see kind of as it goes along, as the panorama goes about like halfway through, a quarter way through, there'll be different kind of sharp edges, sharp lines where the sky dramatically changes exposure. There'll be like a section where it's just a quarter stop, half a stop darker, and it'll go a little bit more, and then it'll be another banding where, you know, abrupt change in the tonal range of the sky. And so that's why you want to shoot in manual mode. And when you're doing that, you do want to expose for the highlights in that situation. And especially if I'm doing these, I almost just always do a bracketed panorama anyways, so that I can go ahead and fix any inconsistencies and make sure that if it is really bright on one side and really dark on the other side, I can still capture the highlights and still capture the shadows and merge it all together. And so that's my kind of final piece of advice there. And there it is. Those are my tips for making the perfect panorama. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you learned something new, please let me know. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.